Hey, this is Stuart at creativeXP, and thanks for joining me for episode 2 of my DMStormD map build for the original Unreal tournament. In this video, we're getting in the Unreal editor to create the initial level Blockout. We'll take the abstract paper designs I shared in the last episode to start building an actual map that we can begin playtesting in Engine. Just before we jump into the editor though, I should probably give a quick explanation of what I mean when I refer to creating a level Blockout. Now you may know this process by another name, as there are a lot of similar terms used by games developers based on their background or the software used when designing a level. That's okay though, as they all refer to the same act of constructing a very basic level geometry, usually out of simple, primitive shapes or meshes, to quickly create the general structure of the level. As a level designer, this is usually one of the most important steps of creating your level, as it is the phase of your map creation where you can focus purely on the function and playable experience of the level without worrying about aesthetic details and ornamentation. Without all those details, your design has to stand up to a lot more scrutiny from players so that they don't get lost or stuck. This is a good thing though, as it can help you identify fundamental design problems with your level early, and since you've created everything with simple geometry, it's quick and easy to modify the level to iterate and improve the design before committing to more detailed meshes. It can be tempting to speed through this stage of designing a level to begin adding details and environment art as soon as possible, particularly if you want to show off your level to others to generate interest in your creation before release. I was definitely guilty of doing this when I started releasing custom maps online as a young modder, but I've since learnt that the more time I spend on my blockouts, the less troubles I'm likely to run into later in my level's development. I also think that there is an inherent appeal and minimalist beauty to a good level blockout, and judging by the popularity of Blocktober, it seems that I'm not alone. So with all that in mind, let's get an editor and start our level blockout. In case you're unfamiliar with the old Unreal editor, I'm first going to give you a quick rundown of how we can use the primitive brushes to create a level blockout. Create a new map file, and to begin with we have a void space which we're going to subtract the space from to provide the playable parts of the level. If it helps, you can think of this void as a block of marble, and we're going to subtract and chip away at this using tools to create the form of the level. On the left here we have our primitive shapes, which are the tools we're going to use to do this. So if I just select the cube here, and there it is, if you can see we've got a 3D representation of a cube in the void space now, and this is the brush that we're going to be using to create the geometry of the level. Now I can select this 3D brush and move it around in the void. If you look at the other perspective windows, you can see the red builder brush moving in 3D space relative to the point of view they each provide. To change the brush, I can right click on this button up here. It's going to reveal these parameters that I can modify to set the size of the brush. So if I go ahead and change some of these values, and I'll just use the standard multiples of 64 units for now. Then I'll select build to update the brush, and you can see it's changed the shape of the brush tool. Now if I select a texture from the texture viewer and press this subtract button, you can see that we've carved a space out of the void in the shape of our builder brush to create a basic room. Next, I can move the builder brush, hit subtract again, and I've created another room of the same size adjacent to the first room. So now I can continue moving and changing the size of this builder brush to create different parts of the level geometry. I'll just select another texture and create a smaller room in between these larger rooms, and now we have a corridor connecting the spaces together. So this is obviously a basic example, but hopefully it shows you how I'm going to create my level blockout using these primitive shapes to carve out the initial layout of the map. And I'll be basing that on the design I shared in my previous video. So with that, let's jump to a time lapse of me creating the first pass of DMStormD, and I can describe a bit more of my process. So after creating the first basic room, I've added a player character model to the level to help me gauge the scale of the spaces as I create them. This is really important during the blockout stage, as it is very easy to lose all sense of scale whilst working with such simple geometry and meshes. Another thing I did prior to jumping in Editor is to refine my design sketches to try and provide a bit more scale reference to these spaces. I was using the grid paper to help me gauge how big these initial rooms may need to be. As we'll soon see though, it's still possible for the scale of your level to balloon if you don't have a good understanding of your player and level metrics. In my case, I think I misjudged how much space to give players in corridors, which ended up increasing the overall scale of the level more than I anticipated. Something else I try and pay attention to when I create a blockout is to make sure that my selected blockout textures use a mixture of basic yet contrasting colours. In some cases, you can even use colour coding to indicate particular gameplay functionality or intentions for the space. This helps make a space more readable and provides better perspective when judging the scale or depth of your level's areas. Keep in mind, if all of your blockout is in the same basic colour, it'll be much harder to read the space, especially since you're likely to be playing the level with basic lighting that can also make everything blend together and feel flat in these early stages of development. Since there are no specific blockout dev textures in this version of Unreal, I'm just selecting a single texture to represent each room based on the identity themes I've already defined in my paper design. Speaking of lighting, I'm going to add some simple point lights to these rooms so we can see what we're doing when we playtest this in game. And with that, we're just about ready to test the first iteration of the basic layout, so I'll compile this map and then we'll jump in game. So now that I'm in game and can run around the level, it's pretty apparent to me that the main chamber is way too big. I've positioned my character scale reference at the other end of the chamber, and as you can see, they're almost the same size as my reticule. Now this is a pretty good indication that the combat range is too large here, making it very difficult to hit the moving target at this distance unless I've got a sniper rifle. Since I want this chamber to be the main encounter space of the level, I want to bring that combat range in a bit to something that's a bit more comfortable. Another thing that I noticed is that the elevation change I imagined for the level is actually pretty subtle over this distance. The bridge feels very low and doesn't make much of an impression in this vast space provided by the high ceiling. I also tried running around the flow lines I sketched in my abstract paper design, and it's clear from this test that the arrangement of the stairs in both rooms connecting to the bridge is creating an uncomfortable movement through the space, so I need to adjust this somehow to improve that flowing experience. Part of the problem is where the doorway is situated in the siphon room, which requires me to strafe towards it to exit the room after descending these stairs. Okay, let's go back to the editor and we'll make some adjustments. Okay, fast forwarding a bit, I've made some changes to the level off camera, based on the observations I made in the playtest. You might notice some of the additions here in the siphon and tunnel rooms, but I'm going to switch to this camera perspective and fly through the level to take a look at the changes in 3D. So I'll just full screen this view and we can start in the chamber. So, big changes that I've made here. I have reduced the width of the room. I think this helps make the space feel a lot less cavernous. I've also increased the slope angle here, so the room is much more clearly descending towards the storm drain at the bottom of the chamber. One change I haven't made just yet is to shorten the length of the room to reduce that combat range, and this is because of the changes I've made to the bridge. So by adding these support columns, I've actually provided some line of sight blockers that help partition this large room into two smaller connected spaces. Obviously, there are still points where the combat range is that long range we identified before, but at least now these columns are providing a nice parallax in the space that can give players an opportunity to close the distance whilst avoiding fire. I'll take another look at this in the next playtest though. Another major change to the bridge is that I've actually moved it further north, so it's now further away from the storm drain. Although I haven't changed the height, the increased slope angle in here is helping the bridge feel higher than before, and I think it feels a bit more prominent as a key feature of the space now, which I'm pleased with. Finally, because of the height change on the slope, I've had to add these 2 ramps to give access to these side rooms for now. I don't think this is ideal at the moment, as I think this is going to overly restrict how players can move into these rooms, but this is something else that I'll test to see what effect it has on the flow. Just looking at some of the other rooms that have changed, as I mentioned, the tunnels room has completely changed now. Previously this corridor was completely sealed off from the room below. I've opened that up now to the rest of the room. I've changed the run of these stairs so that they're much shorter, and this has given this new kind of platform of space to play with. Now, granted, I think at the moment this room is still on the large side, but with the plans I have for this room in the future, I want to incorporate a lot of verticality and different angles that are going to help make this space feel a lot smaller, and this is just because it's in its very rough blockout stage that it feels this large. I think once we've got more of the actual structure in here, it'll start to change the entire dynamic of this room, so I'm not too worried about that at the moment, but again, that's something we can play test. The arches remain unchanged, but as I said, the siphon room has changed a bit as well. Again, with the bridge moving further north, that has pushed everything within the room, within the siphon room further north as well to correspond to that. And the benefit there is it's also improved this connection to the doorway that we highlighted before as being problematic. So now there's just a bit more space to run down these stairs here and then head out the door in one smooth movement and not have to kind of strafe to get out the room. You can see it a bit better as well. If we look through the doorway, you can see that the stairs are in the back left corner now, as opposed to before where the run of the stairs was kind of ending in the middle of the doorway here. So that's where we ended up with that awkward movement to try and run up the stairs. As you can see, now it's a lot smoother. Okay, I'm doing a horrible job of showing this supposedly smooth movement as I try and negotiate the camera up these stairs. Perhaps now is a good time to recompile the map and jump back in game for another playtest of these updates, and we can get a better idea of how this is improved that way. So as I was saying, this approach now is going to flow a lot better than it was previously, so just to demonstrate that. Yeah, that movement just flows a lot better now. And it works both ways. So jumping into the chamber, I just wanted to show off the parallax effect I was describing before. So we've still got our character reference at the end of the chamber here. So I'm just going to start strafing left to right. You can see that as I move side to side in the chamber here, the target kind of peeks out from either side of the column as I move. And what that's going to allow is it just provides a bit more cover in the center of the room, and it allows the players to kind of close the distance and engage at a closer range as they close that distance. So I'm quite happy with how this is at the moment. We'll continue to monitor that, but I think for now that's helping mitigate the problems with the combat range in here. The other thing I wanted to look at is just these ramps I talked about and how they've drastically changed the way that the player approaches these points of entry. So obviously you've got this large ledge now that you can't walk straight through the door, you can't jump onto the ledge as it is right now. So I'm going to have to change that to improve that flow, because right now the player's diverted as they approach the point of entry. On the one hand, it is bringing this part of the storm drain into play a lot more. The ramps are actually pushing the player around the storm drain in that flow, but if a player wants to move straight across the chamber, they can't at the moment. So I definitely think that can be improved, and I've got some ideas about how I might go about doing that. But I think what I want to do next is actually get some bots in here and start playtesting it with those and get a better sense of how the combat plays in here and ensure that the combat is occurring where I anticipate it to. So I'm going to jump back to the editor and we can take care of that now. So to help test the level with bots, I'm just going to add a few health and weapon pickups around the level which the AI will try to path towards during play. I'm not going to spend too long considering which items to add to the level at this stage. And whilst the item selection is an important aspect of the level, for this playtest I'm fine with just adding a nice selection to see how things feel early on. In the future, I'll go into a bit more detail about how the item selection and their locations can play an important role in the design of your deathmatch arena. What I really need for a bot playtest though is some path nodes to connect these items together into a network of paths that the AI will use to navigate the level. I'll just scatter some of these around the level, making sure that the paths are generating correctly, which you can see represented by these lines. Okay, so after placing each path node by hand and validating the data, I jump into game to test the level again and I get a crash. Now after a bit of debugging, it turns out that I had apparently corrupted the level's path node data by running the paths undefined command one too many times in between adding path nodes. Now, I had thought that this was good practice to ensure that you perform a clean path generation every so often, but it seems something went wrong this time. The only fix was to remove all of my path nodes and spawn points that I had just painstakingly added by hand and start from scratch. Great. Thankfully, whilst trying to debug the issue, I noticed this handy button in the build options. Now I was initially put off by this message, but I thought, what the heck, I've got nothing to lose. And I was pleasantly surprised with the results I got in a matter of seconds. I guess that's one of the benefits of using a 20-year-old level editor on modern hardware. So yeah, that's a handy little shortcut I've learned by accident. I mean, I'm going to have to add a few more path nodes in here just to fill in some of the spaces because the results aren't perfect, but they're great for what I need right now. So I'm going to jump in editor and we can do the final playtest with the bots now. So finally, we're in game with bots, and I have to say, I'm quite happy with how things are feeling with the level at this stage. It's far from perfect, but I can get a good sense of how it feels to move around the level and fight in each room. I played a few rounds, as well as watching the bots in spectator mode for a bit to see if there were any frequent problems or spaces that didn't seem to receive much attention. And the tunnels and the overflow areas feel a bit underutilized at the moment, but otherwise there seems to be a good spread of coming and going between the rooms, and combat is occurring around the hotspots I envisaged in my abstract design, which is great to see. As you can see here as well, the chamber is definitely a risky area, with the majority of combat happening around the storm drain pit. I may need to go back in editor to tweak the tunnels and overflow area a bit, not to mention the temporary ramps to enter the siphon room from the chamber. But for now I think I've got a good foundational level blockout to build upon and start adding more structure to these rooms. I'll save that for next time though. I'm going to leave you with a few more shots of the progress we've made so far. In the meantime, please leave a comment if you have any thoughts about the level or any questions about the blockout process I've shared today. And as always, thanks for watching.